So this is the final installment of the small dresser series. You could obviously see the whole piece is together. So a couple more touch-ups to do on this, but in general this is the finished piece. The color the customer went with was an off-white, but it actually turned out to be a similar color to another piece of furniture I was painting, so that worked out nicely. I already had the paint, because getting supplies nowadays is a little difficult. But in this last video, I'm going to show you how I made these knobs. I turned them on the lathe and then carved a flower pattern into them, as well as the finish. So it's a pretty basic finish. It's painted, this entire piece is painted. It's a Sherwin-Williams color, Queen Anne lace, and then the top is a navy blue. This navy blue is really popular nowadays, so I had this color as well. So I had some cherry stock that was about 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches, and I wanted a big broad front on the front of these knobs in order to carve the flower. So I'm just roughing them out on a chuck and attached to my lathe. I bought this chuck because I really wanted to get into bowl turning, but I just haven't had any free time to do it. So I bought this probably a year ago, and this is my first time using it. So once again, with lathe stuff, this isn't necessarily going to be a how-to because I'm not a lathe expert. I've just started getting into it. And I could get what I want done, but getting there is not going to be as prolific as some other people on YouTube. So once I have that down to a circle, I already have a marking gauge so I can mark where my main cuts are going to be. These are not super detailed knobs. Like I said, my goal was just to keep the front pretty broad so that I had a nice surface area to work with carving the flower. And for the sizing on the rest of the knob, I have a ton of hardware laying around my shop, and I just pulled the numbers and the thicknesses off of that existing knob I had. So I'm going to be using some calipers to get that inner dimension. You could see I'm just cutting it down to get that inner dimension. And then it curves a little on the bottom and the top, so it's a little bit of a smoother transition. And once I have that pretty much flushed out so it looks nice, I also have calipers for the back end. So the back end is going to be a 1/2 inch, and then I could drill a 1/2 inch hole into my cabinet and easily attach these knobs without needing hardware. So you can see I sped that up. Obviously I used another set of calipers in order to get that down to almost an exact 1/2 inch. And I had to make 8 of these. That's pretty much what they look like. Very simple, very basic. I'm also keeping the stump on them so I could carve them a little bit easier. So those are the 8. They all turned out pretty uniform. The shadows are making them look like they're not in that photo, but they actually turned out pretty uniform. So this is the basic shape I'm going for with the flower. It's modeled off of a daisy. These are the bits I'm using. It's pretty similar to the other carvings. There are a lot of roughing bits and then a smoother. And all I'm doing is I took kind of a rough outline of a daisy, and I'm using that carbon paper once again to transfer the shape onto the piece. And also the dowel plug maker comes into play here again, going pretty deep on this one, and this is all into end grain, so a lot of the wood will burn with this. Then I'm using a rounded over bit to remove the bulk of the material. I'm making a concave shape starting from the edges going towards the center, so that will be create a real sense of depth within the flower. It won't look like such a flat piece, and I have enough thickness in the wood to be able to do that. Then on the sides, I'm going to come up where those flower petals split so that the edges themselves have a little bit of design to the piece as well. So the nice thing is I have a small vise I can mount this all in, and I can kind of turn it and twist it as I'm carving. I don't have a great carving setup, but this vise, with the movability of it, ended up working out quite nicely. So this is all roughing out. I'm just removing the bulk of the material with this rounded over bit. The work goes pretty quickly, and once you're on the second or the third one, you already have a system. So then I'm using almost a cone shaped bit. It's kind of a rounded cone to go through and create another concave shape to form all the petals. So I'm leaving a little bit of a mountain in between each shape, and that will be where I'll add a line just to really clarify the shape of the petals. But you can see I'm going through and just smoothing out more of that, creating more of a shape, and leaving that high peak in between all of the petals. This is where the bit really started to burn. These aren't super expensive bits, but you can see how I'm going around the whole piece and doing that. And I'm trying to get underneath the middle of the flower as well, just to separate all those pieces. It gives it a much more realistic look when you undercut as much as possible. So then I'm using that square cylinder bit to go through almost like a pencil, and on those ridges create a line, and the line will now look like separate petals. It's not super thick. There's not a lot of material to work with. The whole point of making this design on the knobs, I originally wanted something a little more detailed, but it was just so small. The smaller you get, the details start to get really muddied. So this design without a ton of detail looked a lot nicer than some of the other designs I was thinking. Then with the same bit, I take it out of the vise and I kind of define those edges of the petals on the edge of the knobs as well, just cleaning them up a little bit. I timed these, and they took one towards the end when I had a real good system down. These took about 20 minutes to fully carve, doing power carving. And then this is a diamond bit, and I use this for sanding, and I'm just going to go through and clean everything up, smooth over some of those rough parts, and get some of the patches I missed. This will also still remove material, which is nice. And then that is what 4 of them done looks like. So once they were done, I could just cut off the bottoms, which I don't think I filmed, and that's all 8 of them finished. So then to attach them, I'm just drilling a 1/2 inch hole into the cabinet. You can see on the runners on the side, there's a little piece of dowel, and that's how I got the depth I needed. If they stuck out too far, I moved the piece inside the cabinet back. But if they went in too far, all I did was add a little shim on the inside of the runner in order to get them all to set the way I wanted to in the cabinet. You can see how those now fit. And once I had them all nice and fit and they were flush with the front, I went through and glued them all into place. I don't think I filmed this either, but I also went around and caulked the outer edge of all of these after primer, so that there was no seams or anything, because there was some tiny little gaps in between the cabinet face and the butt end of the knob. So this is the primer I'm using. It's an oil-based primer, so it kind of makes a mess. It's a little sloppier going on, but it's a high stain cover, so I like it. I don't have to worry about down the line tannins or any sort of stains in the wood leaking through. It's a really nice high cover primer. I've had pieces before where I've had tannins in the wood or old varnishes on that I couldn't get covered, but this primer always covers it, which was perfect because all the burn marks on some of the carvings, especially the knobs, I won't have to worry about those leaching through the top surface over time. So I'm just going through, I slap on primer, I don't do it cleanly. And I primed everything. I primed the inside of the cabinet as well as the edge of the drawers, and I actually end up sanding those off. I don't film it. It was enough added thickness to make the drawers stick a little bit, and I think once all the paint fully dried, it wouldn't have been an issue, but it wasn't worth it to me to worry about it, so I ended up just sanding them down. And it was a lesson learned with this style drawers not to paint the inside of the cabinet or the sides of the drawers. You could go through and prime at the top as well, and you can see how nicely it hides those burn marks in the top of the knobs. So then, instead of doing a full sanding before I prime, I like to start priming and then sand. The grain will be raised a little bit and it takes all those high points off. I just think it saves an entire round of sanding doing it this way, but you can really do it how you want. I could get most of it with an orbital sander, but then I went through with a hand sander and got other spots.
And after primer, I like to caulk some holes and some gaps, add some putty and spots that need putty, and then do top coat. The top coat, like I said, is Sherwin-Williams Pro Classic. It's Queen Anne's lace and semi-gloss. I actually have this because you might recognize this project, which is still in my shop. We're going on the third trial run of a color for the customer, and it was perfect because the customer that wanted this small cabinet wanted an off-white, so I could kill two birds with one stone. And Sherwin-Williams is really great nowadays with everything going on. You call ahead and they have curbside pickup, so there's like no human interaction whatsoever except for the phone call, so that is also quite nice. So once the primer is dry, I could go through and top coat everything. And off-white is really funny because it always looks white to me unless it's next to the white of the primer, because Kills is very bright white. So it's just a nice, almost a cream color. It's a white that has a tint of yellow in it. It's actually a very pretty color. And then she wanted the top navy blue. So I went through and like I said, I've had this blue since last year when I made that bar was this blue color, and I've used it on multiple projects because this navy blue is a very popular color. Go through with a smaller brush and get in all that detail. And then this is the finished piece. I got some nice photos of this. This isn't fully done. I still have my third round of touch-ups to do on projects like this. I always put on 2 coats, and then the third coat is always spot touch-ups, but in general this is pretty much finished. It's going to be almost ready to deliver, and I got some nice detail shots of this as well.